With Bolinas Lagoon on the east and the Pacific Ocean on the west, the Miwok Indians once settled this piece of land. In the mornings, when the fog hung heavy over the waters, the sky opened here first, and the Miwoks called their encampment Hole in the Sky. It is now the home and studio of renowned sculptor Ron Garrigues. In this interview, Ron talks about his friendship with mythologist Joseph Campbell, the importance of sacred images in his life and in his work, and about his long-standing passion bringing to public awareness the rampant destruction wrought by man's presence on our fragile planet. In the face of one person's inability to change the world, Garrigues has chosen to send his message through his work. Ron, hi.
Hi.
May I come in?
Welcome to Valhalla.
Thank you for inviting me. I've never been to Valhalla before. Okay. So, Ron, thank you so much for inviting me here.
Well, you're quite welcome, since you invited yourself.
You agreed.
Yeah, it's fine. Sure, I think it's okay.
Okay. Ron, I'm impressed by all this wonderful stuff and by your garden, which we're going to see later on in the day. But I think you did your first sculpture when you were 29?
Yeah, I was amazed at it. It was sort of not drawn, it just came out of me, and I had no ideas. You know, in Jesuit schools they don't teach you any art. There are no art classes, and there are no art history classes. And I didn't see a museum show till I was 26. But I walked into a room full of like 120 Van Goghs at the De Young, and I stood in the middle of that stuff and started to cry. I was so affected. And so then I really became interested in art and started reading art from the beginning, you know, from the cave and from, you know, the cave stuff at Lascaux, and from all of the ones that were known at the time. And I became interested in prehistoric 30,000-year-old mother goddesses dug up in a great crescent from France around all the way to Russia, around the north. The Venus of Willendorf, you know, the Venus of Lespig, all of those Venuses that survived, you know, out of mammoth ivory and petrified coal, and, you know, many things that have survived, but so many more have not. These things dug up out of the ground or in burial sites or wherever.
Ron, what's particularly interesting is that I understand you knew Joseph Campbell.
Yeah, I did know Joseph Campbell, and actually quite intimately, in the sense that we met him at Esalen in the formative days of that place. And he'd give workshops there, I don't know, maybe every 6 months. So when he came, he would stay at our house.
He would?
Yeah, he'd stay at our house for maybe a week or so before he went down to Esalen. He'd be preparing his slides, and so I was able to have, you know, serious one-on-one conversations with him. We went to museums in New York, the Met, and places like that where I remember once when he taught me how to go to a museum show.
What was that like? What did he tell you?
Well, it was a bronze show from China, ancient bronzes from the Shang and the Han dynasties, and we said what we do is we get there when it opens, and when it opened, we went immediately to the end of the show where no one was. Everybody was starting at the beginning, of course. So we had a chance to explain to me what these sacred ritual vessels were, and what they were, what they represented, the historical part of it, the aesthetic part of it, and so yeah, when he was at my house, Joe had a habit of eating beef mainly. So what he liked was steak, or porterhouse steak, or roast beef. I mean, he lived mainly on meat, and I do too. I mean, I'm sort of a carnivore, so we got along well that way. But he started, always before dinner, he'd have 2 stiff Glenlivet Scotch, and so he'd loosen up a little bit, and then we would, not that he was uptight or anything, but he would loosen up with his interpretations and how he got out of, from Columbia during the Depression, where his father's business went bankrupt. So instead of getting an MA, he had a friend who had a shack in upstate New York, and he would drive into Manhattan once a week to the public library and take out an armful of books and return an armful of books. So he stayed up there and he read about mythology for 5 years straight during the Depression.
As I remember, Joseph Campbell was once asked about shamanism, and he said that our present-day shamans are artists, and you're an artist. So do you feel that your mind was opened by your relationship with Joseph Campbell to the archaic and to the spiritual?
Yes, to some extent. It wasn't that I was entirely ignorant of that, but it expanded that, and I saw where the origins were.
Right. At that time, could you see in Joseph Campbell something of the greatness that he would later become known for?
Oh, absolutely. Are you kidding? Yeah, in New York, he wasn't given the credit he was over all those years, even though he taught at Sarah Lawrence for 39 years. There was a thing where the people in New York really, there was a rivalry between Joe and Eliade, and New York Times especially favored Eliade over him, and so all the kudos went one way, and he got quite a few. It doesn't mean he didn't, because he lived in the East Village or the West Village for really a long time.
Yeah, I know. I see many wonderful objects that you've collected and that you've actually made, and your studio is here on the property. Could we have a look at the things that you've made?
Sure, whatever you'd like.
Okay, let's do it now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is an early Edo period wooden Buddha that's gilded, but it also has black lacquer under it, and it's in perfect condition, and came from Japan right after the war with a general of some kind who kept it in his house. This is a particularly nice example. It's a Buddha table that's from about the 17th century, and I've been to Kathmandu 6 times, and I know all the dealers there, and so I'm kind of able to, get in the back rooms. Yeah, this is probably an 18th century Lama table, and on it is a forged iron dorje, a very large one. Forging like that was very difficult. I don't have any idea how they did it. It's got all kinds of stuff on it that you can't see from here that I won't go into, but it's about 13th or 14th century, and it was forged in eastern Tibet in an area called Kham, and it's incredible. I don't know how they did that. Nobody knows really, because iron was difficult to forge. They had to get a pretty high temperature, and having only wood, I don't know how they did it to get the heat up that high, but they did. That piece I did in 1960 and decided to keep it and not sell it, as I did with several of the wood pieces. First show I had at the Legion of Honor, I sold out in a week, but I had that one not for sale, so it did not go anywhere. It's a Bruce Beasley with a couple of scrub jays around it, which are virtually pets around here for us. They eat our cat food, so they're attracted. You know, they're corvids, smartest birds in the world. Yeah, that sculpture I did in 1990. It's inspired by the Venus of Willendorf. Those assemblages are made so they would sort of create a sanctuary between the ancient and the alien space age weird things to span prehistory to post-history. We don't know where it's going to be. Yeah, I made these in 1990 as I did the other one, part of the edition. The edition sold out. These are artist proofs, my own copies. So it's the front and the back of the same sculpture. Yeah, this was a friend of mine, Jim Danish, who lived in Nepal for a long time, and then up on the Lost Coast for about 20 years, and who has moved back to Kathmandu to retire and live there. And it's porcelain, and it has Coyote the Trickster in it, and circles, which I love. And I just said, let's trade a piece, and you do what you want. And that's what came out of it. You see, I've traded this stuff to make a sculpture garden, which I could never afford. That's done by Grant Irish. He's a bronze sculptor who lives over in Oakland, and I think he's great. My wife Maria and I, in the very early 70s, were in a Shivite tantric ashram, and that actually introduced me to Shiva and the sacredness that surrounds him as the creator and the destroyer, and is probably one of the I think is the main god worshipped in India, aside from Brahma and Vishnu, the three main gods, because he's really the creator and the destroyer. And it seems pretty relevant to my work at the moment. And these are a series of Shiva lingams, and they Shiva is usually Shiva and Shakti, which is his cohort. The vagina is usually on top, or on the bottom of Shiva's lingam, or his face is pictured on the front or all four sides of the lingam itself, but I decided to reverse it and put the yoni on the front rather than Shiva's face. And as you see, those yonis are all different. And yonis, like fingerprints, are all different. My sculpture for the last 20 years, I have cast 70 bronzes of skulls, both human and charismatic animals. And what these are doing to our environment. These over here are overpopulation statements. This one is called "Yes Sir, That's My Baby," and the back one is called "No Sir, I Don't Mean Maybe," and this one is called "Dick's World." And I've done a lot of overpopulation issues because I think it's the main one. But I've covered every subject that is visibly possible to do. Approximately half of these cast bronze skulls are human, and the other half are charismatic endangered animals. This one is on human cloning. I mean, not human cloning, but cloning. The first mammal clone was Dolly the sheep. This shamanistic Frankenstein has got a DNA scarification and a bolt through his neck. And this one is corporate greed as is being manifest right at the present time. It has moneyed eyes and mouth. And this piece has to do with the overabundance of automobiles and our reliance on them, and hence a giant carbon footprint. And this one is an assemblage of which I've done a number over the 100 or so probably over the last several years. And this one has all corporate logos around the equator, and these are 13 American buffalo jaws, and the name of the piece is "The World Being Taken for a Ride." This human skull has to do, it's got a television set in the front and a knob here, and it says what it says. This is a duck-billed platypus or an ostrich egg, which I sometimes use found objects, as you can see from a lot of these things. I do them out of clay so that the piece is done in originals in clay, and that's a found ostrich egg. And this is one of the 3 popes I did on overpopulation. This one is a male responsibility piece. There's a condom over one eye and negative testicles and the world's largest caterpillar coming out of his mouth. And the idea is that men have tools, and this is a tool they ought to be very careful in using, otherwise we'll have too many babies. This one is overfishing. It's got the grasp of everything in the sea, you know, there's swordfish and dolphins and the great sucking sound, and it's got the skeleton bones of a fish. This one is a dolphin, which gets caught up in tuna nets, and it has a tuna net third eye. This one is a nocturnal monkey. They cut the forest down to grow coffee, and it cuts the habitat down on the monkey. This one is first one of the series, actually, which in 1989, the Exxon Valdez oil spill actually enraged me, and I started doing these. It's a raven skull, which is the top of totem poles in up in St. Charles Sound or Prince William Sound, wherever it was. And I put a patina to look like oil. This one's particularly relevant in our present time because it has to do with war, but it has a cross on the top, which is a World War I bayonet. And I call it Onward Christian Soldiers, which is got to do with the war in Iraq and the Crusades, which will never be forgotten by Muslims.
Ron, what is creativity for you?
Well, I think encoded in our DNA are three probably most important things. The first one is violence. In order to be the most successful predator that's ever lived, we have depended on violence, and we will continue to depend on violence to get our way and to get rid of our enemies. And the other one is sex, and that has to do with getting our DNA into the next generation, but it's a lot of fun, and it's also very emotional and whatever, we all know about that. And but that's encoded in our DNA because unconsciously we want to get our progeny into the next generation, just like worms or tigers or anything. We have to continue evolution, but we don't know anything about that. And creativity, I think, is also inherent in the human. It only manifests in some people because they have a sensitivity or the opportunity to do it. Guys work at IBM and they're creative, and guys work at Microsoft and they're creative, and they do it because they get paid for it. Artists generally don't get paid for it. Everybody tries to make art expressive or beautiful or appealing or decorative or whatever thing, it just depends. Some art, I think the definition of art is quite simple. It's translating the emotion of the artist to the emotion of the viewer. If that happens, then I think it's successful. If it doesn't happen, then it doesn't happen, but the guy creating it felt that it was necessary for him to get it out of his system, and it might be, to some people, ugly, might be attractive to others, but creativity is a force that you have to get out if you have the opportunity to get out of it, or the will to stick with it and suffer through impoverishment or whatever it happens to be. And they will do it and nearly starve to death or die, or you can think of all kinds of people from Modigliani to everybody who's suffered and died making their art. My conception of a higher power is probably religious or sacred. It has nothing to do with an organized religion. My personal belief is that we're an irrepeatable event that happens to be part of the universe, and a carbon-based animal that when dead is reduced to about 2 ounces of carbon, which probably releases its elements, its protons, electrons, neutrons out back into the universe where it began.
The Big Bang.
The Big Bang. So I don't believe there's a heaven. I don't believe there's a hell. I believe there's a universe of which we are part of. You can't destroy matter and you can't destroy energy, as Einstein proved quite seriously. And I think we just get blown back out there where we started. And, for me, that's very consoling. I don't have any fear of going to hell, which the Jesuits tried to instill in me, and I don't have any faith that I'll meet my ancestors in a place called heaven, which to me sounds kind of crazy, but a lot of people believe in that, and they believe in being reincarnated. If they've been good, they get realized, and if they've been bad, they come back as a shrew or peanut butter. I don't know what they come back as, but they all have, everybody in the world pretty much used to believe that there was a place to go that was better than this. And I think the universe is about the best place you can go since it's us. And it's a possibility that the universe of which we're a part, the universe of which we are a part, created us maybe to observe itself.